Welcome to another episode of Edge of Reality TV. I'm Lynn Nickerson, your host, and your other host is Willie Hassel, and he's behind the camera making this all happen today. So we're at America's Stonehenge in North Salem, New Hampshire for a second time. It was actually 3 years ago that Willie and I came here to interview Dennis, and we both secretly wished to be able to do an investigation on the paranormal side of the site. And our group is called the Spirit Chasers Paranormal, and luckily for us, Dennis granted us that opportunity. So on June 5th, 2020, it was this summer, we came and we did a little investigation. So in addition to interviewing Dennis Stone today, we're also going to be interviewing different members of the Spirit Chasers team who came to investigate, and we'll be getting their feedback on the paranormal nature of America's Stonehenge. But before introducing Dennis and revealing the results of that investigation, I'd like to refresh your collective memory about why this location is so special. America's Stonehenge is an ancient stone site dating back to at least 4,000 years, and it actually rivals England's Stonehenge for its treasure trove of mysteries. And although America's Stonehenge has gradually leaked some of her secrets over the years, it still remains a very mysterious location. So by way of research, it has been determined that the stone alignments located here on the site actually represent an astronomical calendar. And it does do actually several things. One of them is it marks out the winter and summer solstices. It also indicates the 4 cardinal directions. There are minor lunar alignments, as well as other placements of celestial significance. So the bottom line is, the design and the purpose of this location was very deliberate. It was not happenstance. Over the millennia, many people and cultures have regarded this place as a sacred site, and each in turn has left their physical remnants and some energetic imprints. So Spirit Chasers Paranormal came to investigate in particular the energetic imprints. And that's why we've come here today and to reveal what we found out. But first, it's Dennis Stone who can place the known history into focus and update us on the most recent tests and what has been discovered here at America's Stonehenge. Welcome, Dennis. Thank you for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to speak with you.
Well, I'd like to welcome you and Willie. Thank you for coming up here. Glad to see all of you.
You know, I learn something new every time we get together. Your wealth of information. So tell me just a little bit of history. When was it that your father acquired the property?
Got involved in 1955, and he first heard it on a radio show. Yep. And he opened it up about 3 years later in 1958 to the public. So we've been going for 62 years.
Wow. And at what point did you and your family acquire, you and Pat?
Yeah, my dad passed away about 10 years ago. My wife got involved with this back in the early 90s, actually. But when he passed away, the site, was passed on to my wife and myself. Yep. Okay,
so yeah, you've been here for quite a while.
Oh, yeah.
You say 62 years?
62 years, yeah.
Okay, so I'd like to place this cultural location in context. So can you briefly review some of the known cultures that have frequented the area?
The evidence suggests that the people that were building this site may have been from the Old World. We know Native Americans were here for many thousands of years, going back to the Paleo time. And we do have a carbon dating of a fire pit about 10 feet from where we're sitting right now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that was done in the early 90s, and that date was about 7,400 years old, plus or minus a couple hundred years.
Oh, my goodness.
But inscriptions and other pieces of evidence suggest that people like the Phoenicians, the Libyans, and Celts, among others, were visiting the New World in this site too.
And you mentioned the Celts. Was that the same thing, the Druid Celts, the same as the Celtic Iberians by any chance?
Yeah, it's when the Celts were in Spain and Portugal, basically.
Oh, I see.
It was a melting pot, yeah.
Okay. So in addition to that, what is some of the other evidence that was found here? I know that pottery shards had been detected, right? In
yes.
The well area?
Yeah, there's been pottery shards down by the lower well. That was actually possibly a kiln. They found pottery grit. That is a clay deposit, the whole swamp area. And pottery was found at the glacial cliff shelter back in 1958 by stylistic dating They put the age of it middle woodland period, about 2,000 to 2,500 years old. Pottery on the main site, some of it's historic, but other pieces of pottery on the main site actually resemble some of the Western European corded pottery from a much earlier time period, according to some researchers. So
really?
2 different types of pottery, 2 different time periods, and then we have the historic period with different pottery, of course. But radiocarbon dating, the astronomical research gave us a date of the site. They both agreed about 4,000 years old. And we'll see what the optically stimulated luminescence turns out. One chamber down in structure actually in Pennsylvania. The results just came back after 2 years. And the date on it was 450 BC. So it is not colonial or post-colonial.
No, not at all.
And so we'll see what these other sites come up with dates, you
Okay.
know. And it may take a little while. It used to take 5 years for the results. The Upton Chamber in Massachusetts,
Whoa.
down it's to 2 years. We told this could take up to a year, but the gentleman, the doctor, is going to try to expedite it.
Yeah.
We also have the LiDAR. So when this is done, it'll be the first time that LiDAR maps the surface to show you what it looks like. The radar will show you the subsurface, what the composition of the soil is, and any obstacles they may encounter trying to drive those tubes down and how far they have to drive them. That will be all recorded permanently. And in GPS too, the woman has a GPS pole that costs $12,000 just for that one piece of equipment. We'll get accurate GPS, measurements where it was taken, because you have to do several tests, several different cores,
And that is in relation to the LiDAR testing? in
Yes,
particular?
the LiDAR, the radar, and then the GPS where it is, and then they'll drive the tubes down. And again, they've never done all three of these type technologies used together. So we'll have above, below imaging, and then they'll drive the cores. So if there's any question as to how they did this, where they got the soil from, it will be on radar, it will be on LiDAR, and it will be GPSed, and that will take out, I think you took it in the wrong spot, it's not valid, blah, blah, blah. All of that stuff,
Yeah.
And that's just never been done before, and so this will be the first, and that's why they're bringing people from the state archaeologists and stuff like that, and New England Antiquities will be there with Dr. Feather. So it'll be probably
Great.
20 or 30 people, possibly, depends how many actually show up.
And actually about a year to get the results, you said.
Yeah, and hopefully sooner than that. If we do, we'll make an announcement of that. It'll be very, very important. But it's kind of a first here for OSL. It's also a first for all that equipment. So it's 2 firsts that I know of. And our initial research indicates, starting in the 70s, I was aware of this, that a megalithic yard. And it's 83 centimeters, and it's being found in South America, Central America, Mexico, and also at other sites in the north.
Wow.
And we may be able to do this with using the LiDAR. That's one of the really big things we can use with that LiDAR.
That'll be terrific, because that'll give us some dates.
Yeah, more data,
Yeah.
Yeah, and dates too.
Okay, so we were just mentioning dating, and I was wondering, there were some bone fragments found here. I know that there were some bone ashes, probably found in the east-west chamber, but there were also some fragments located here on the site. And twice they had been tested. The second time determined that they were human. But my question is, was there some way of dating those bones?
Yeah, there is. There's radiocarbon dating, of course.
Yeah.
But when they were found in the 30s, radiocarbon dating was not developed
Okay.
until 1950 with Dr. Livery. So they were found, they were left on display once we opened our building up, and they were contaminated just by being in the open.
Yeah.
But they were looked at by Dr. Lucy Hoyen, I believe, at the Smithsonian Institute. They were sent down there. 1968, and she did a report on that, and she said that they were human. They were a little denser, and surprisingly denser than she thought they would be. They appear to be human, and they have markings on them too, and these markings, they were like little grooves in some of them, were made while the bone was still alive.
Yeah.
I found where they were located, because I found all the paperwork and reports and the newspaper articles that came out in 1968.
Where?
And they were in my dad's files, and I found a lot of other interesting things. But when I saw that, I went to our display case and I identified them, because we know what's in the display case. We have actually many thousands of artifacts that are still tucked away, but the ones on display, we have a pretty good idea. I didn't realize those 3 bones were the human bones. What I'm thinking now, and talking to a number of different people, is DNA would still be very possible. And to do a DNA test would be, we're doing the OSL thing. I think the next thing on our plate might be trying to find somebody that can do DNA.
That would be
How much does it
great,
cost? Who does it? Who's the
Yeah.
expert? And are these things still viable because they've been sitting in our display case for for 60 years, and they were exposed since the 1980s. But I think since the 1930s, I think we can still do DNA testing on them.
Okay, I've got two questions then. Where do you suppose these bone fragments were found on the site? Do you know that?
Yeah, that's in Goodwin's report. They were found probably in that area you mentioned, East-West Chamber.
Okay.
And we did find other bones that even Dr. Lucy looked at, and they were from the watch house. And one of them, she said, was possibly bison. And when she talked to her colleague about a possible bison or bovine found in this area of the country,
It'd be unusual, wouldn't it?
yeah, at least we think it's unusual. But the colleague said, well, when you go back into a prehistoric period, bison were here. They roamed the landscape everywhere. So that's possible. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't think they could live here. Okay, so
Yes,
that's a
yeah, they could
possibility.
survive here. Yeah, and then the other piece of bone, two pieces of bone were teeth, and they didn't know what they came from. They had possibility. They were kind of unusual too. There might be some animal that's extinct. Even when the first settlers came in
It could
from
be,
Europe.
yeah.
And then the other thing was a bone pendant, which has a drill hole on it, and that's on display, and a stone pendant. They were both found in the watch house too. So
And the bone pendant, it must be animal, I would think.
yeah, it's a small, probably a bird. Maybe it's a very small piece, and I think somebody could identify it. Very possibly.
Getting back to those fragments, though, you did say that this scientist mentioned that the bone fragments were denser. Would there be any relationship between, say, like, particularly an Aboriginal race that might be of a really small stature? Would smaller people have denser bones necessarily?
Well, that's a really good question. I was on Richard Hoagland's show a couple weeks ago, and he brought that up too because he's really into tech stuff and he's really into all of the sciences and stuff. And he says, that really struck him. He got going on that, and he felt possibly it could be a different species of person. And it gets into, okay, what species could this be? I think the DNA will take out a lot of the guesswork if it's doable,
Yeah, if it's doable.
So I think we got to do that. And because he wanted me to get on the bandwagon immediately, and put this to a test. And I said, well, things take time.
Time and money.
Yeah, and I said money, and he goes, well,
Yeah.
fundraising and all of that. And so I mean, that's something that we are interested in having.
Yeah.
At least we have 3 of these bones. I don't know what destructive process would they do DNA. We don't want to lose them, but I think we can do it. I think we can possibly do that.
Well,
yeah.
another reason that I was asking is because in the revelation from the psychic information, as well as from the guide, as well as one of our investigators, they were getting the impressions that there was a smaller race here that came from the Mediterranean or the Mesopotamian area. There were a couple of races, but they were very small, dark stature.
That's correct. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious if maybe there's some relevance there. So that's very interesting.
Yeah,
It'd
there
be
seems to
great
be a
if-
shorter people and then maybe a taller people, and the shorter people, I mean, I don't know if they're, Celt or some sort of relation to that, or maybe from a different area, because they do come up in history. The shorter,
Or
a
from
little
a
bit
warmer
darker,
climate even, maybe.
yeah, darker
habitat.
skinned, kind of
Yes.
thing, and that comes up from a number of different people and researchers,
So the next step I wanted to talk about is Mr. Hans Holzer, who is the great ghost investigator. He came here. He visited the site in the 60s and 70s. Or
That's
was it
correct.
Just the 60s?
Well, in the 70s, yeah, he
in the
came. Yeah,
70s.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because the psychics he brought with him, one was very renowned at the time, and her name was Ethel Myers. And she had, excuse me, a guide she relied on, which was her husband in this life, and he became her psychic guide. And there were also 2 other psychics. One was Nancy Abel, and the other one was Ingrid Beckman. Probably not really well known. Ethel Myers was definitely well known. But they came up with certain amounts of information from a psychic source, from their own psychic intuition. And they all determined that the site was sacred to most of those who frequented here. Excuse me, that they came to worship their gods, they performed ceremonies, they held celebrations, and they performed rituals. And they also came up with the idea that they felt many people had died here. Cold winters and so forth, you could have people getting a disease and you might have a whole family wiped out, and that they had to have a place to store these bodies. And we suspect that it might have been the East-West Chamber. So that was probably used for some of the dead bodies during the winter until they could be buried. So for the audience benefit, I want to quickly review more of the psychic information that came through Albert. And what he did is he gave his take from up above on what the influx was of the different peoples that came here from about 20,000 BC. And there were actually 5 major migrations. So this plays into the types of people that came here. So he suggested that the first people on the hill were from Mesopotamia, and that they included Egypt, Libya, Iran, and the Mesopotamian Valley. And he also mentions the Atlanteans. The Atlanteans were brought up. And one of the psychics said definitely that the Atlanteans were from off-planet. They weren't from here. And that they were the master race at the time. And they felt that it was their duty as the more intellectual to instruct these individuals that are now on this planet. So that time period was approximately 20,000 BC to maybe 18,000 or so. The second migration were the smaller Egyptians. They were small and dark. They were very contentious people. And again, the Atlanteans tried to intervene to bring them some sort of spiritual development and fulfillment, although they weren't really terribly successful because these people were a brutal race. The third influx was the elite Egyptians, and apparently they arrived here around 18,000 BC, and they seemed to prosper, and they were very harmonious for about 3,000 years. Again, there was another influx of Nordic people from approximately 15,000 to 12,000 BC. And then following them came an influx of Mediterranean, not Mesopotamian, but Mediterranean people. And they were from, more specifically, Phoenicia, Macedonia, and the Aegean Islands in what is now Turkey. And the time frame on them was about 12,000 to 10,000 BC. So all of these Mediterranean people were absorbed by the tribes that were already here. And according to Albert, they kind of had the tendency to lose their traditions. And that happened like between 8,000 and 4,000 BC. So you had a real melting pot of people and cultures at that period. And about this time, too, the Native Americans came on the scene, and they wanted nothing to do with the hill. At least they wanted nothing to do with the people that were here. This original group being kind of warlike, they wound up feeling displaced, I guess you could say, and they left on their own. So after that, the Native Americans kind of became very comfortable with the spot. And that period of time was very harmonious. They lived with nature, and they had a lot of celebrations in celebration of their abundance and their prosperity. So now these migrations, of course, make up the vast cultural heritage of Stonehenge, America's Stonehenge. So another point of that is, since there was both harmony and dissension and maybe some warlike events, that all of this left some kind of emotional impact on the site. It left its own psychic imprint, as it were. And this is what we came to discover or investigate while we were here. But only time will tell, with more scientific study, what the imprints have to tell. They'll have their own story to tell us. So Dennis, this brings me to my next point. You and your family have lived on this land for 62 years, and you've been here during the day, different times of day, different times of the season. So I was wondering do you ever feel that you're not alone?
I think there seems to be a presence here,
Really?
A very ancient presence too, to me,
Yeah.
Nothing very specific, but I do get a peace and harmony, and it does feel like, very old time period with people here, probably over many, many years. I think we sense that, we know archaeologically that's true, from the datings and everything. But yeah, I think there's kind of a presence still. I walked my dogs up here in the evening. It was very, very peaceful. I don't get anything really negative out of the place. When I was a kid, I think I used to hear stories about the place, and they would frighten me a little
really?
bit. Yeah, but that was when I was young, and I think
Yeah.
maybe it's just I've evolved, or maybe it's what I take on the place, is the peaceful part of this existence, because there
Yeah.
probably is a layering of cultures here.
Yep.
And I seem to pick up the nicer parts of that, myself. I may filter out other stuff, but
Yeah.
I feel peace and harmony, I think.
I think most of the investigators felt that the place was just very harmonious, very
Oh,
peaceful.
Yeah, that's what I feel.
Yep.
Yeah,
That,
yeah,
that was their takeaway.
yeah.
Well, thank you very much for talking
Well,
with us today, Dennis.
thank you.
And we're going to have some closing thoughts at the end of the episode. We'll get your conclusive thoughts.
Well, I look forward to that.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
So, coming up, we're going to be interviewing our cast of investigators to learn what kinds of paranormal activity they encountered and find out if America's Stonehenge actually is haunted. I'm sitting here at the beginning of the processional way with Mary Melanson. She's a medium and both a shamanic and a Reiki practitioner, and her website is eaglespiritguide.com. So welcome to Edge of Reality TV, Mary.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Great to have you here. So thank you for joining us today. So in a minute, we're going to be reviewing the stops along the path that we both got some strong impressions from. But first, I'd like to clarify something to the audience. I think it's very important to realize that there have been many cultural mixes that have stayed here, and as well as all kinds of festivals and celebrations. So as we revisit our impressions, it's important to understand that the information isn't always delivered to us in a chronological order. So an explanation is in order for the processional way. This is the path right here that we're going to be walking. And this was the path that was taken in order to reach the hill where we believe all the ceremonies took place. So it's believed that some of these ceremonies included the march of young virginal women that were aged between, their teenage years up to about, 20 years old. And the different stages they would go through is blessing and purification, and they were prayed over, and their ultimate destination was the hill. So this might have been for a fertility festival or for a seasonal celebration, but we don't really know because the time periods aren't always clear. So Mary, let's start with the watch house.
Okay.
So when we walked by here, what was it that you felt? You came over here and you looked at it?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I felt was when I heard the word watch house, so my ego not being tapped into and channeling, thought, okay, well, somebody looking out like a lookout tower of sorts.
Yeah,
and,
that came to me too.
And, and I did come to that for a minute, and maybe they might have very well used that in some of the cultures. And I'm not really sure who they'd be watching out for, especially when we get back up there and talk about the circles of all the tribes that came. But when we come closer look into it, the crystal is just absolutely beautiful, and I was so drawn to that. And it's a quartz.
She's talking about a triangle quartz.
Triangle
granite
quartz
stone.
crystal. And it was just really all about
Prominent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's all about protection and purification. And they would put the ceremonial tools and modalities
Yep.
for the different ones they would have, and they would put them in there for, like I said, for purification, so they'd be pure and ready to go for that.
Well, to back that up with confirmation, it's really interesting because Mary E. Gage, she's got a book out on stone structures. She's spent a good part of her life studying stone structures in New England. And she believes that the stones placed in these, the granite stones that we're talking about, there was usually one large triangular granite stone, which of course has crystal in it. She believes that they were set in these locations to protect and block out uninvited guests. So there you get your confirmation for the protection and the purification, actually, of the ceremonial tools. So that was good confirmation.
Yes.
You were right on about
yeah,
that.
and what's really interesting was after when you found that out, unwanted guest, and what happened to you when we were here together.
Oh, that's
It's-
true. The second
yes.
time I came by, because that was my first impression, but I felt that I wasn't supposed to enter the chamber, and I just felt pushed out. So what I did is I respected that, and I just snapped a shot. And lo and behold, in my photograph, I had a huge orb, sitting there right beside the granite stone. So I felt like I was rewarded for having abided by their desire. That something was in there and didn't want me in there.
Absolutely.
So how about if we continue on to the wet well, which is just up the path here, and we can meet you up there in a minute.
All right, let's go.
All right. Well, we're standing here at what is called the wet well. As you can see over here, it's a really old structure. It's lined with stones. And beyond that over there is a section which is called a clay pit. And they had some carbon dating done over there, and they found pottery shards and so forth. So we know that this well is very ancient and it still has water in it. So when you came by here, Mary, this is supposed to be a very active spot. So I came by here and I didn't feel anything in particular, but when you came by here, what was it you felt?
Well, I just felt that it was a great place for the girls when they were doing the processions down here, coming down here. It was a great place to get bathed, cleansed, more or less, because they really weren't into a lot of that on a daily basis and whatever. So for the ceremony, they would get all nice and bathed and have oils and flowers, fragrance, be really nice and fragrant.
Do you also feel that it was a spiritual cleansing?
Yes, it was very
Okay.
much a spiritual cleansing. I'm sorry, I should have said that. While they were getting ready for the ceremony and their
Yeah.
rituals. So it was very spiritual. Now, it represented washing away any of your sins and whatnot,
Yeah.
making you clean, cleansing you both physically and emotionally, energetically. Absolutely.
That I didn't pick that up exactly here. I did, however, pick it up in this area kind of back over to our right here. This section opens up almost into a circle. The stone walls are sort of curvilinear, and I feel that the women probably did get cleansed here, but they moved over to this area, they gathered in a circle, and then I think that they were prayed over and blessed and honored, and they were told what a sacrifice they were making to do this. But I also felt, as I mentioned before, that there was some sort of element of deceit. I think that perhaps they might have been drugged. You felt they had been given some kind of
Yes.
tonic, right? Like an herbal drink or
Drink
something.
of sorts, yes, absolutely.
And it was probably, something that had drug qualities
It's
to
to
it,
it, yep.
which would relax them. But I think it, excuse me, made them groggy as well. So I think they collected over here. I felt that the elders were there as well, but they were not participating. It was just women blessing women. So there might have been a priestess, and I think they of course were dressed in their tunics and so forth, and then they went on their merry way and walked further up the hill, where it's just here at this knoll, and made a hard right to proceed to the Ceremonial Plaza. So that's where we're going to go to from here, is the Ceremonial Plaza, where the sacrificial table is located, as well as the oracle chamber, because we had quite a bit of activity at the sacrificial table and the oracle chamber. So we'll meet you up there. Well, right now we made the trek up the hill, so we're standing right outside the oracle chamber. Excuse me. To our right is the sacrificial table, and up here to our right is the overlook area, and we're going to be talking about that in a minute. So we won't be filming inside the chamber today, but we're going to mentally walk you through what it was we picked up psychically. So Mary, do you want to give us a run through as to what you felt when you walked in the chamber? And this is the chamber door right here.
Yes, well, when I came in, I started on the other side. This goes all the way around. And when I first came in, there's a couple like little shelves or closet cubbies. And I felt that they had put different things for their ceremonies, offerings for the gods.
Yeah.
And whatever, it would have been different things. I got, some of it could have been foods and perishables that way. Some of it was, felt more like, what's the word I'm looking for?
the sacrificial type
Yeah,
offering?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Some of them were.
Yeah.
Really, that's the word, thank you. And I felt also like when we went into one part, there's like a long closet, more or less, where actually I felt bones in there. Now, I'm not saying like people bones, they could be, but animal bones of sorts. I'm not really sure what they were doing with them, but they were stored. And maybe that could have been when someone had passed or whatever
It
before
could be.
burial.
Yeah.
Because they did it as a ritual altogether and whatnot. But it just kind of felt like that would be in there. And whatever on the very end right here, there's another closet. And I had my camera and I wanted to get pictures and I could get nothing from those. And I believe that's where Mary Lou and
Yes.
yourself still, none of us could. And the camera, I thought my camera was broke. It was hot and
I did too.
hot and humid. So I thought, oh my God, humidity got to it. And as soon as I was done that and came up here, that camera worked perfect for the rest of the night.
I wound up
So-
taking 6 black pictures
Yes.
in a row when I was at that one particular niche right there
and
by
that's
the
what
opening.
happened to mine.
So it could have been that, well, doing my research, I found something very similar to what Mary did. When I came in from this end, as soon as you take a right-hand turn, there is a shelf in there, like a niche, like a reliquary. And I felt that definitely there had been some sort of container for blood. And as well as perishable goods, it could have been food. They could have offered foods to the gods. They could have offered ashes. I do know that in Hans Holzer's book, Long Before Columbus, one of the psychics, Ingrid Beckman, she mentioned that she felt that ashes had been stored in there. Whether they were human or animal ashes, we don't know. That it could have been either, just depending on the festival. So we feel that those offerings, those were used as offerings to the gods.
Also, if you don't mind me saying, the
Yes.
Native Americans, obviously we know that they were here too at
Yes.
different time periods. As you said, there was many layers. I do know, being a shaman, that when we have a sacred fire and they take the ashes left from that fire, because it's been blessed by the high priestess and whatnot, and they'll take them and save them. So it very well could have been
They'd save
ashes
the
from that,
ashes.
yes, for the next fire, for a starter.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know
Yeah.
that.
So I'm
Okay.
wondering, when you said that, I'm wondering, oh, that could have very well, like you said, there's many layers, so we don't know
That's right.
exactly who was who in
Yep.
here, but there
and
was
what
a lot.
festival
Right.
it was. But
Yeah.
oftentimes when a culture comes, it will absorb the traditions and the rituals of the previous culture. So there's a blending of cultures after a while. So as I was saying that, I think Ingrid Beckman believed the same thing. I don't know if she doesn't really know either, but the important point is, over a course of 3 years, Mary and I came up with virtually the same information. So I thought that was
Yeah.
pretty good confirmation.
I think awesome.
Yeah. So the next point we're going to move to is we're going to go over by the overlook area, and we're going to talk about that. We can get a little bit better view if we move over there. So we'll meet you there in a minute. So we've just come up from the oracle chamber, and across from the sacrificial stone is what we call the overlook. And when I came here the first time, I had some really strong impressions of 3 gentlemen standing there. And I say gentlemen, but I got the impression that they were elders or priests, and they were overseeing what was happening. They had an attitude of being very smug and condescending, and I couldn't understand that, because I felt, how could they emotionally distance themselves from what was about to happen here on the stone? I got the impression that they were Egyptian-like. They were very tall and slender. They were wearing tunics. Again, they had the headbands on with the snake insignia right at the center of their forehead. And I think that they were perhaps Egyptian or Phoenician. That was the feeling I got from them. And then those that were crowded around them appeared more to be darker skin, black hair, and just from somewhere else. I got the feeling Mediterranean or Semitic, like I mentioned. So I know that you saw something similar, Mary, so could you give us an account of what you saw?
Yes, I did. I ended up seeing 3 men. They were not tall. They did have the darker skin. They also had, they were bald, but I got short and stout, more or less. But I did really get the negative energy. It wasn't good energy at all.
Yeah,
with them.
combative and
yeah, very much so. And they also were very superior. they stood up here and they observed what was going on and whatnot, but they felt very superior to everybody else that was around them, and they weren't really even approachable to everybody else. Everybody else kind of like shunned away from them. That's what I have gotten from that.
You know, it's interesting because there's a correlation between, it sounds like two different cultures, because
Yes.
there was a culture here of smaller, dark, warlike individuals, dark skin, black hair, that came from Egypt, and supposedly, according to Han Holzer's books long before Columbus, they had been transported here by the Atlanteans. They came first. After that, there was a group of Egyptians that came, and they were supposedly the elitists, and somehow there was a connection to Atlantis, and they felt that their duty here was to educate this small, dark, warlike tribe.
Yeah.
And I can't help but feel that, you know, there might have been an assimilation of rituals,
Yes.
because, you know, very much what you mentioned was the same thing I picked up, except it was another race. They were tall, slender, bald, with tunics. They had white tunics, but they still had that same superior, condescending attitude.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's very similar. And Ingrid Beckman, the psychic, Hans's psychic, mentioned something very similar to what Mary mentioned. She picked up on the warring tribe more than I did. But she also picked up on Phoenicians being here in tunics and being priests and elders.
Yeah. Well, there's like, again, like you said at the beginning, there's so many layers of history here, and there's so many different tribes that come.
Right.
So what we're getting is not chronically, and that would make it so much easier, especially
Right,
when you
it
start
would.
to do the research.
Yeah.
But we're not doing it that way. We're just getting bits and layers in.
And we don't want to disregard
Right,
anything
no.
either, because we can usually find evidence
That's-
later on after
right,
research.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty good. That
I
we-
thought that was good
yeah.
confirmation too. And then the next point that we wanted to move to was the Sacrificial Stone. We had a wonderful table session here, and Mary channeled a couple of entities. So you want to talk about that?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. Well, the first one that came in was a Native American chief, and he's a huge guy. We were standing right here, and he was like just big. And he's the one who channeled with me, gave me all the information. And what he wanted to really, his point was, there was, again,
To impart to everybody.
exactly.
Yeah.
There were so many different layers. They came here in peace and whatnot during the berry season, June, and the summer solstice, because they did use the wheel. You know, they have their medicine wheel,
right.
but they also use the astrology and incorporated that and whatnot. And they did have ceremonies and rituals
Right.
and whatnot. They did not sacrifice animals or humans, you know, but they had offerings and whatever to the gods.
According to the records, there had been Native Americans here like up to 20,000 years BC, and the chief was trying to say that that's when they were coming in harmony. And you had asked, well, did they erect the stones here? Did they have anything to do with the stones? And the answer was that the Native Americans did not build the stone
Stones,
walls.
no.
But they had a circle, and you said, he's showing me a medicine wheel, and it's aligned to the stars.
Right, yeah.
So at that time, they had astronomy information.
Yeah, and I thought that was really pretty
Yeah.
amazing to come up with that. And then he went on to give us some little bit more details of the different cultures that had lived here, but we've already
Right.
talked about them and whatnot.
And the other important thing that you just brought up was the berry season.
Yes.
And you kept saying, well, did they have a berry celebration? They came here in the berry season?
Yeah.
And they did have a berry celebration.
We had no idea about that.
Yeah, that they planted corn, they celebrated that, and then they came here for the berries.
And they came different tribes. And the reason they came here was this was the highest peak.
Yeah.
And they could be further to the sky and to the Creator. And of course, all the trees weren't here as tall as they are now. They had clear viewing when
Yeah.
the circle was made and for the astrology and stuff like that.
Yeah, supposedly this was pretty much all stone when they
yeah.
arrived. And you know, another thought that occurred to me, what if when these other cultures arrived, like 7,000 BC, perhaps they incorporated the template from the medicine wheel for the alignment of the stones when they erected the megaliths.
Very well could have.
Yeah, I thought that could very possibly be. So,
Yeah.
they weren't dumb Native Americans. They had some information.
No. And they were all about coming here in peace. The tribes, they traveled for days to get here. They
Right.
stayed for up to 3 weeks. And of course, they were celebrating the berries in the summer and whatnot.
And
they
harmony and
harmony,
abundance.
right. And they would trade wares.
Yeah.
Because each tribe had their own things and custom. But what really was a common thread was Mother Earth, and they were here to and not worship, like is that the earth was the god or anything.
No, but to
they knew the
celebrate.
creator, but to celebrate
Yeah.
the earth and everything we got from the earth for survival, for clothes, all of it.
And also, too, you asked the chief if there was any connection with the sacrificial table and the Native American tribes. And his response was, no, this was not us. We were not involved with
that.
this.
Right. Yeah, they were not.
And he went on to say, I can't exactly remember what you asked him about the rituals, but he said, well, you got the information that blood was being poured into the groundwater.
Yes, that's right.
During our opening conversation with Dennis Stone, he mentioned that there is a drainage system here. In fact, they've marked the site with white chalk and paint to highlight the areas and the apertures where the rain runs off of the land. Well, apparently, according to, it was Mary Gage again, she studied stone structures, and she even said that it was known that they would dump water in as an offering to the gods down the drain system. But with this dark tribe that was here, they apparently substituted the water for blood and dumped the blood into the ground system. So in reviewing what Mary Gage had to say in her book, that's pretty darn good confirmation. It's very, very strange. And oh yes, the other entity you channeled was Jonathan Patty.
Patty, yes. Okay, couldn't come up with that last name for a minute. Like, oh my God, who was he? And that was really interesting. And I totally made an error on that because I got the era of 1820, but I said out loud, no, that couldn't be possible. He wouldn't be the
1920s.
Right, I said 1920 because ego gets in when you channel, and like I let my mind go in because like, oh, that's impossible for that. So I said it, but it's like, no, really, what I really heard was 1820, and should have said that. And then after that, you confirmed that it would have been the 1820 also. And he came here. He was a shoemaker. And traveled over to work and whatnot. And he was really interested because we were talking about the documentary. Like, was he here? He liked doing the documentary. And he kept saying hidden document. And it's like, oh, the documentary, this is like being hidden. No, there was two things. And it took a little bit to like, what the heck is he really saying? Hidden document was one, and the documentary. Continue with the documentary for here. He wants us to be filmed. He wants all people. Not
he
just,
wants us to receive exposure.
Exactly. And get more people in doing more researches and stuff like that. I know there's been
involved
a ton of
with
that.
the preservation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To keep it going and to put it out there. How many people, I didn't even know this was in my backyard.
I know, it's
until you
amazing.
called and told me. I'm like, really? I didn't even know it.
Yep.
It's like, so for more awareness and to bring it out
That's
there
right.
because this was like a pet project for him and whatnot. And we did talk, and he had 4 children. I did get that, but he did not want to talk about his children or his family or any of that. He just really wanted to talk about that. He was glad we were here, the hidden, and about something about the hidden document.
Emphasizing the hidden document.
And keep doing the work, the documentary and whatnot.
So we happened to get confirmation on the hidden document. Shortly after we did the session, we went down to the museum to talk to Dennis, and he happened to pull out a box and he started going through it. Who knows why? He wanted to show us something. And he came across his, oh yeah, and this is Mr. Patty's will, that nobody wanted to talk about it because the property had been left to the first son, his son from the first marriage. So apparently it wasn't a real popular move on Mr. Patty's part. So that's why we feel that he was reluctant to talk about the will, and that was the hidden document.
And it was found that as we were talking.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really neat.
It was just amazing confirmation. Yeah. After hearing both sides of our story here, it's interesting to note how Mary and I both picked up on really similar information, even though it was 3 years apart. So we've got to emphasize, no matter, specifying a timeline can really be problematic. So we really always have to pay attention to the information that comes to us and not intellectualize and say, well, that's not possible.
Exactly,
'Cause
like I did with the number. That's
Yeah.
what happens.
Because usually that information will surface somewhere else in the books during our research. So it's kind of interesting to find out that it's hard to place human occupation here when history says no, it didn't happen, that there weren't human beings living here between 20,000 BC and like 7,000 BC, but there were.
Yeah.
So we just hope that eventually the tests will prove that some of the information we came up is an actual story. So, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today, Mary. We really appreciate
Oh,
it.
you're welcome. It was really great fun. Thank you for having me.
Our
and it was
pleasure.
really wonderful to come out and to see this and to pick up the footprints and whatnot.
Yeah, you're absolutely
because
right.
it's wonderful that everything holds the energy. Doesn't, like Lily says, doesn't die. It neither transforms, transmutes, and the footprints stay. Doesn't mean it's always
Yep.
haunted or anything.
That's
it's
why
just
we came
the footprints stay. You can touch things and feel it. Pick up the energy of what that was.
Yep.
And this was a wonderful experience for me. So I
Good.
thank you very much. It was really great
We
fun.
enjoyed it. That's the important thing, is to come here and try to get verification from our psychic impressions and imprints.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we'll be talking to Rick and Mary Lou Ayers. We'll be back in a moment. Hi. Well, I'm sitting here with Rick and Mary Lou Ayers. They've held a long time interest in the paranormal. And within the last couple of years, they've joined us on a couple of investigations now with the Spirit Chasers Paranormal. So they're both sensitive to spirit, and they're well known for their great orb photos. In addition to capturing the unexplained anomalies, they've caught some pretty strange things on film. So we're about to discover what they psychically picked up here in America's Stonehenge. So welcome to our show. Nice to see you both.
Thank you.
So I'm going to ask you a question first, Mary. From your memory now, you had mentioned to me once that you have actually seen full body apparitions.
I've seen shadows.
Okay.
That was in the James house.
How about like in the barn? Didn't you see a full body apparition of a woman or something?
Not in the barn. I saw my sister-in-law coming down the back steps.
Okay, and she had passed.
Yes.
See, that counts for something in my book.
Yeah.
That certainly adds to your
Yep.
intuitive ability.
Yep.
That's amazing. How about you, Rick? What is it you sense?
Feelings mostly, like presence, energy.
Is it like your family members, though? Is that pretty much what you hone in on?
That and like energy at places.
Do you normally think that it's like human?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, and then you get an idea of who they might be. I suppose it would depend on the locale.
Yeah.
Okay. So, you had mentioned to me, Mary, too, I wanted to bring this in because I think it's important. This is the North Solstice Stone. Yeah, the North Solstice Stone.
Yep.
So what did you feel when you came out here? You said that you were drawn to the stone.
Yeah, when we first got here and we were standing up at the little lookout tower up that way, something said, walk up to this stone.
Really?
And I said, we need to walk up there. And in doing so, after we got up here, I said, and I didn't hear anything or anything, but it felt like there were presence all around us. There were people looking at us, but didn't really want to interact, just like, hey, what are you up to, kind of, why are you here?
Yeah, inquisitive.
Yeah,
curious as to
inquisitive.
what you're doing.
Yeah, and it feels that way today as well.
Really?
Yep.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yep.
Well, that doesn't surprise me because we were trying to film here earlier today, and our batteries were going dead.
Ooh.
And we kept getting this staticky sound
Yep.
over the microphone. So when you snapped those photos, that you got some really good orb shots this time too,
Yeah.
during this investigation. So was it this area or was it just
No,
beyond?
It was down in the main site. I was
Okay.
standing, the orb picture that I got that had a big orb in it was, I was standing on the deck taking it down over the oracle chamber and the table. And
Oh, in
right
between
up
there?
in between there, right up near that fence line, there was a big orb. Yep, and a couple small ones.
Sometimes I wonder if the small ones are children.
Mm.
But anyway, let's get to the sacrificial table. What did you feel, Rick, when Mary Melanson was going into her table session and she was channeling the chief? Were you picking up anything there?
It felt there was energy there.
The energy there? Yeah. Okay. And where were you when you picked up your orb photo?
By the observation tower there.
Okay.
I was looking into the woods over on the side here. I'm not sure what area this is over here, but
Yeah, just kind of a wooded path area
Yeah.
too. Yeah, one of the other spokes of
Yeah.
the calendar. Were you getting an idea of what?
it felt like there was people out there looking at us,
Okay.
like we were being watched from there.
Did you feel that they were Native American or
Yeah.
other? Yeah.
It's-
Kind of hard
It's
to
kind
tell,
of
I
hard
know
to say.
sometimes.
Just like,
yeah.
but probably Native American because it was.
Well, yeah, but certainly it seems like a lot of other people have picked up on the Native American energy, and Mary Melanson was one of them too. Also, too, you had started. You set the flashlights up on the table, on the sacrificial table, and they started flashing.
They started flashing.
You always have good luck with that.
We thought at first it was coinciding with the Native American chief that she was getting.
Yes, yes.
But then when we asked if it was him, it didn't go off. But then when we said, is it Mr. Patty who had the foundation there,
Yes.
it started going off.
Yeah.
That's
So we felt we were communicating with him.
Yeah, because I don't think that Mary Melanson was aware of this other entity coming in, but you nailed it.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. So in general, what are your feelings on the site? Do you feel at peace? Do you feel that there's a lot of negative energy here?
I didn't really feel negative energy.
No.
Okay, good.
But energy. There's energy.
Yeah. Dennis Stone had mentioned
Yep.
he still feels that there is a presence here.
Yeah.
He said an ancient presence, and I hold that to be
I
true
think
as
so
well.
too.
But I think there was just so many layers of time and cultures here.
Yes.
I think there's a lot that's still hanging around. But did you feel anything frightening at all,
No.
Mary?
Didn't feel anything frightening. Everything felt very peaceful and spiritual. And like it's a place to be preserved.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's almost a serenity about it.
Yep.
Yeah, you had mentioned that you wouldn't mind camping out here for a night.
No, yeah,
Is
and
it-
that was Rick.
Yeah.
Rick said, yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it
one
was
place
just-
you
it
could
was
come
so
and
pleasant.
yeah, you wouldn't be afraid here
No.
to be camping. No.
Yes, it seems like there's just so much good that overtook whatever negativity might have
Yes.
been happening here. So
Yeah.
I guess the consensus is the place might be what you would consider haunted, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but not maybe
But-
just residual
Yeah.
haunting
I think
and
a
not
lot of
regular.
residual, just maybe people passing through.
Yep.
Mr. Patty, he seems more on
He's more of an
intelligent haunt, yeah.
He is.
Yeah.
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 But I guess the consensus is that Stonehenge is a very peaceful, serene place to visit.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll see you next time. In addition to psychics capturing strange light anomalies and getting impressions from the past, one of our investigators, Jim Ashworth, he captured a compass spinning wildly out of control during the same time that our medium, Mary Melanson, was carrying on her channeling session during our investigation at the Sacrificial Table. So Willie Hassel, who is the other host of Edge of Reality TV, and also founder of Spirit Chasers Paranormal, he's going to explain to us what he thinks may have happened. So hello, Willie. Nice to see you on this side of the camera.
Well, thank you, Lynn. It's nice to be on this side of the camera. It looks a little bit different over here.
Yes, it does. Different angle. So Willie's going to be a stand-in for Jim Ashworth, who couldn't speak with us today. So tell me, what do you think happened when that compass was going wildly out of control?
Well, you know, it's a well-known theory in the paranormal world that ghosts or spirits are made up of energy. And if you go by Einstein's theory that energy can't be created or destroyed, then that leads credence to the theory that once a person dies, that their energy still exists.
It may not exist in this dimension, but sometimes it does, and that's when you get ghost activity.
Right, so, you know, it's basically the goal of the paranormal investigator to try and detect that energy, to detect whether or not there actually is a spirit around.
Yeah.
And one of the more common ways to do that these days is through the use of like K2 meters or tri-field meters. But any type of meter like that is subject to outside interference, like microwaves, faulty wiring in a building. Of course, that's not going to happen out here, but that's the problem with all these kind of instruments.
Yeah.
So the old school method, I mean, way back before anybody even heard of a K2 meter, they used to use compasses.
Long before computers.
Yeah, before computers, for K2 meters. And so Jim was trying the old school method that night. He had his compass. And normally a compass, of course, will point towards magnetic north. It's the strongest magnetic direction. But if you do have a spirit in the room with you, the compass may deviate and point towards that spirit. And if the spirit is moving around, it may actually even follow the spirit. And in other cases, as what happened here at Stonehenge, rather than just moving off
And
a
following the
little bit
spirit.
and following the spirit, sometimes the compass will just spin wildly, which is what happened here that night.
And not only was it spinning in one way, it was reversing itself.
Yeah.
And then it was hovering between quarter of the compass, and then it would spin in the opposite direction.
Yeah, it was just
crazy.
doing all kinds of strange things.
And he was stationary, right? He was seated and he was holding it.
Well, actually, it was a wrist-mounted compass, and he was just sitting, and he had his, I don't know, probably had his hand on his knee.
Well, it's a good
know
thing
exactly.
that he caught it, though, because he might have missed it.
Yeah, I know it. And so when the compass spins in a circle like that, it could be detecting either a spirit or it could be from a portal.
From a portal, yeah.
So we don't know for sure in this case which it was, but either way, something
happened.
strange was going on.
Yeah, that was... Go ahead.
At that same time, when the compass was spinning like that, Sandy said that she saw a shadow walking through the woods and heard footsteps in the woods. And nobody was out in the woods. We were all down by the sacrificial table.
Yeah. So who knows what that was? Could have been energy at the sacrificial table or out in the woods, but something was operative that time. So, I thought that was really a good piece of evidence. Totally unexplainable.
Yeah, and fortunately he did notice the compass spinning, and he caught it on camera. He filmed it, so we do have that piece of evidence to show.
Great. Well, thanks for explaining that to us. That's pretty darn interesting.
Look at that, it's spinning right in circles.
Yeah, there's something. I told you, I heard footsteps and then I saw a shadow over there. So there's something you're tapping into. Here it goes.
This is crazy.
Well, welcome to the closing segment of Edge of Reality TV's Visit to America's Stonehenge. I'm seated here once again with Mr. Dennis Stone, our gracious host, and we're about to wrap up the burning question, is America's Stonehenge really haunted? So we're going to get into Dennis's closing thoughts on the matter in just a moment, but first, I'd like to quickly add that our segment today has focused on the history and the mysteries of what used to be called Mystery Hill, which to this day is still as enigmatic as ever, because much of its history still remains cloaked. So we know that there's been a diverse series of cultural groups that have walked this land, and there's evidence to suggest that this area was once frequented by Native Americans, and I believe you said Chaldee monks, and maybe the Druids was considered. And they also believe that the Phoenicians visited here, the Celtiberians, the Egyptians, and even Mesopotamians from the Mediterranean area. So it's also to the white settlers. We can't leave the white settlers out, and they, of course, frequented the area in the last 2 centuries in particular. So it stands to reason that with all of these multiple cultures and religions, that there would be a very varied energy imprint at America's Stonehenge. So these groups came with their own culture, their own religions, and some of it was based on a celebration of gratitude, while others, they were into fertility rites, or they were into the worship of Baal, the sun god Baal, and their primary goal in that was acquisition of power and control. But as attested by our investigators, we feel that America's Stonehenge is really very haunted, and there's a lot of energy here to experience. So all of our investigators have sensed or experienced something, either residual or active. So I'd like to do a recap of experiences, and this brings me to Dave Schroeder, which is somebody that Dennis is very familiar with, and he was pretty impressed with the place. He not only hosts the Holzer Files, but he is also host of Darkness Radio. And just recently he invited Dennis on, and Dennis did a show with him. So during the course of the interview, Dennis was asked some very interesting points, and this is what I'd like to address with you. I've got about 5 different points that I wanted to discuss with you. So the first point begins with you as a child. Your father acquired this place, or he opened it up to the public in 1958. Mm-hmm. So you've been coming here frequently as a child. So you had mentioned to Dave Schroeder that you were a bit apprehensive coming on the site, especially when you were a child. Could you tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, we had come up to this place since 1955. I was about a year old.
Oh.
And so basically grew up with the site. My sister was born in 1956, so she got involved with it right after that too. So yeah, as a child, we heard stories about Native Americans calling this place taboo, don't go near it, just, kind of folklore.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and not sure what that's based on, but we heard that many, many times. But also the chambers up there, they probably weren't places that people lived. We think probably some of the structures could have been used for burial purposes.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, you know how kids are with cemeteries, particularly at night, the spooky factor. So as a kid, yeah, I didn't want to be around this place at night. During the daytime, it was okay. There were a lot of people here,
Yeah.
and we enjoyed the place. But at night, I always had that fear about the place at night. And when we weren't here every day, we had manager running this place. But when we came down and visited the place and then left here, it's like, good, I'm not here at night, I didn't want to be around. And that was like that until into the, probably around 18 years old, we finally stayed overnight here one night.
Did you stay outside?
Yeah, we actually stayed up on the site. It was some of the other guides, probably about 7 or 8 of us. And it was 1972, so I think I overcame some of my fears by the time I was a late teenager. And we actually watched on a black and white TV on the Sacrificial table, and we had electricity up there back in those days. We watched the Planet of the Apes right on the Sacrificial table. So we all gathered around that, and we did that. After that show was over, we actually set up some cots inside the Oracle Chamber, and that's where we spent the night.
You spent the night in the chamber? In
the chamber. And I didn't have any bad dreams or anything bad. I think we were pretty tired because we stayed up pretty late, had a very short night. And then the next day we had to get all that stuff out of there for the visitors, and then clean everything up, get the TV out of there and everything. And then, but we had a great time, Well, so my fear was a little bit, I think, over by that time.
Well, did your friends experience anything at all?
They,
any nightmares or?
Not that. Well, I'd have to ask them. This is so. This is how many?
Nothing that you.
1972. So going back almost 49. I can't believe that. 49 years ago.
Well, another interesting revelation that Mr. Schroeder's investigation brought up was the children, and he and Alexandra Holzer had been in the Oracle Chamber when they both heard a child talk, and they heard children giggle. And during this time, they had the recorder running, and on playback. They heard nothing. They heard absolutely nothing regarding the children. Now, what's really odd is that sort of thing has happened to both me and Willie during an investigation where we hear something with our ears, but it doesn't record. So that's something known to happen in paranormal circles. But what is important about this is that psychics had picked up on the fact that children were involved with the site, and recently through research, it was confirmed that both the Phoenicians and the Mesopotamians involved their children in some of the rituals. So there was that. And then the night that we were up here on our investigation, 2 of us heard children giggle, but it was outside, it was not in the chamber itself. So it really makes you wonder. Did you ever hear any children's voices?
Not that I recall.
site?
I will say that there are some family members that do not want to be known.
Yeah.
And when that came out, you know, this person said, "Yeah, I've heard that too."
Yeah,
and
so
this
someone you
is-
know has heard the children.
and more like in the 1990s. And there were
That's
a couple,
okay.
couple other things too. Yeah, so they heard the young children. You know, not myself though, but a couple other family members have. So that was kind of interesting that came out again.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
3 times now the children have picked up for these, being involved in the celebrations and rituals and so forth that went on here. Now, point 3, Alexandra Holzer, she had a very interesting experience while she was on the hill. And it was a case where all of a sudden everything around her went dead silent. This means that she didn't hear any birds chirping, she didn't hear the wind, she didn't hear traffic, and she said she found it quite unnerving. So this too is something else that happens in the paranormal world. And have you ever heard of Jenny Randalls?
I have
Before
not.
today?
I have not.
Well, she's a British investigative journalist, and she's written a great deal on investigating paranormal stuff in England. And she happened to coin the phrase, the Oz factor. And this is in reference to the dead silence that people seem to hear before some kind of paranormal event takes place. So this is actually what Alexandra had experienced, and she wasn't the first one. This is kind of common. And part of the characteristic of that is feeling totally isolated. It's almost as if you've been removed from your present timeline and you're sitting in a vacuumed bubble of silence, and it's isolating. It's kind of scary. So you said you never.
I have heard people say that before.
Oh,
yeah.
have you?
Yeah.
Have you heard people from here
Oh
say
yeah,
that?
we've had just regular people walking through say that, but also paranormal experiences over the years. Usually in October, we used to have paranormal
Yeah.
events, and I think that's come up a few times. It's just like the dead silence, you know.
Yeah.
I've heard it, but myself, usually I was flying for a living, and I was usually working weekends, and that's when most of those happen. But I'd get feedback, and I'd hear about that. I've been up there with my dogs before, and it's been quite, you know, towards dusk and very, very quiet. Not a bird chirping or any animals. So I don't know if that's
Yeah.
part of it, but it just.
I think it is.
Yeah, it's very almost like it's kind of like almost like the sound's been turned off. You know?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's like you're in a
Yeah.
cocoon.
I've had that.
It's
yeah.
unnerving.
I'll pay more attention to that in the future, you know. But
Please
I
do.
have
I'd like to know
had
about
felt
it.
that up there with the dogs, and then you know.
Excuse me, what is this issue with the dark cloaked figure? There was one that was captured on camera when the Holzer Files crew was here filming, and then one of our investigative team members, Sandy Nickerson, she happened to see a shadow person just about the same time that Jim Ashworth, he experienced his spinning compass. So someone you know experienced that too, right?
Well, when I saw
Dennis?
the reveal with the Holzer Files and they showed it, you know, I was quite amazed by that. I was kind of taken by the whole thing because it was very, very vivid, basically. Yes, a family member has seen it. They referred to the shadow figures, also shape-shifting too. And again, this goes back into the 90s.
Something did shape-shift that someone saw?
A couple of family members have seen that, you know. When I say family members, there are 2 of them, but they just don't like to talk about it. And it was in the 90s that they really saw this, you know.
And it shaped from what to what?
I think from a humanoid kind of form to like an animal form, I believe. But that dark figure that we saw in the Holzer Files also triggered a memory from one of those people saying that's something like
Wow.
very similar to that, you know.
And that's very typical of Native American, shamanism. So that's not just pulled out of a hat. That's something else that's very real. There was something else I wanted to mention too, point 5, which concerns synchronistic information. And when the crew was here again, Cindy Cara, who was a psychic investigator on the Holzer Files crew, she kept mentioning she was feeling snakes or feeling snake spirit in the ceremonial area, and she got the feeling that they were integral to some of the rituals that were performed there. So I wanted to bring up again the fact that when I saw the three elders, I saw three of them with headbands, and they had a coiled snake insignia on their headband. And this is something that one of Holzer's psychics picked up on. Her name is Ingrid Beckman. She picked up on the headband, and the one that I saw it was like a woven band, and it had orange and yellow on it. And I just can't help but feel that it's the colors of the sun. I think there was a connection there. But anyway, I got to thinking about snake. What is the significance of snake? So I Googled it on the internet, and the first thing that popped up was the Brotherhood of the Snake. And these people espoused a belief system that was developed to give humans advanced spiritual knowledge in order that they could break free from their spiritual bondage. So in other words, there must have been some sort of slavery involved, and they felt totally oppressed. So this was apparently developed in the Mesopotamian area around 3000 BC. So the fact that Ingrid Beckman picked up on this, she also sensed Mesopotamians coming here. The fact that some of their rituals have been picked up in this area. I just think it's really a strange confluence of elements when you put it all together, that I think is just beyond coincidence. So I thought that was another important point to bring up, the snake, the feeling of snake being involved in the area. And not that it's a bad thing, because snake is also knowledge, but there is the essence of snake having been felt up here.
And we have the Serpent Walls. You've been
That's right,
discovering.
of course. That's a good point, the
Possibly
Serpentine Walls.
Yeah, anywhere from 27 feet up to 2,550 feet in length.
And those are very important because they're very deliberately built.
Oh, yeah, they're amazing, and there are 14 of them, we think, today.
14?
Yeah.
Did Cindy pick up on the fact that there were serpentine walls?
I think
make the connection?
That came out during their talk at the end with David Schroeder. He mentioned the fact that, Dennis, mentioned there were serpent walls here. But these serpent walls are throughout. We're finding them everywhere, all the way out to California now, so it's quite interesting.
Well, in closing, I'd like to just set aside the ghost factor for a minute, and there are a couple of things in the field of technology that Dennis has been involved with, and one of it is the LiDAR technology, and he's been waiting for some core sample results to come back so that, that's kind of for mapping out the site, right?
The LiDAR is, the LiDAR.
The LiDAR. Yeah. So that photo came back. And if we get a copy of it, we'll put it up on the screen here so that you can see what it is.
It's pretty amazing, yeah.
But does that also give you an indication if there's something underground?
Well, LiDAR is just laser, and it just goes to the surface.
Okay.
And an advantage to that, too, is it strips out all the vegetation and trees, and you can see things. With this particular LiDAR, it's handheld. You can see down to 1 centimeter. So you can see high resolution. It looks like it's airborne, but it's actually a guy walking around with this device on his shoulder. And it's so it's mapping, and then we've been using ground penetration radar, and that goes below the surface. And we're actually going to blend both technologies together because we've had both done here. And for the first time, they have the software and the capability of actually blending above and below 3D imaging of the site. So, and then the OSL is the project. It's a dating technique.
Yep.
And we've been using that. That's kind of cutting edge too, although it's been around for a little while, actually dating the age of dirt. And so if you have a structure, the dirt next to it, they actually take a core, they go through a whole process with the core, and it takes quite a while to process it. And then they tell you when the dirt saw the light of day last, and they can do it with rock too. So we had 4 cores taken. We've had the results of 1 core. It's uncalibrated. They have a little device they still have in the hole that's measuring radioactivity for 1 year, and then they'll pull it out, and then they'll calibrate the date. We'll get something more accurate. The Oracle chamber had 3 cores, and those haven't been processed yet. The one we have is the wall in front of the watch house, which is actually the end of the serpent's tail. And the date on that is roughly 1400 AD to about 1600. So it's pre-colonial, pre-Mr. Patty, pre-Patty family, and European, settlement in this area. So we have something prehistoric there, late prehistoric though. So.
But then the next core.
We'll find out more on the next core, But it's from the Oracle chamber, and we'll find out. We have nothing at the moment, and we're anxiously awaiting the word on that. It'll be uncalibrated until September also, and there'll be Actually, there'll be 4 cores. They're going to do 3 cores and save one for reserve if they want. They're $1,000
okay.
per core to process.
Yeah.
So it's very expensive.
So it would be really interesting if they could get an indication if there's anything under the ground, because it was Ingrid Beckman again who thought that there had been religious symbols actually that were written on walls of rock under the ground. So there was an indication that there was either an underground tunnel or a chamber underneath the area, just kind of off the center of the ceremonial site.
There's been a suspicion about that. You know, I think the ground penetration radar, we've only run it over a few thousand square feet.
Yeah.
Because it's a very slow process compared to LiDAR, where you walk around at your own pace very
Yeah.
quickly. But the processing of our 15 acres of the 110 took 600 hours of computer work. But the radar is only covered a few thousand square feet. So we'd love to do more of it and see what's under the ground. Maybe there's something there that's hidden.
Oh, that would be fantastic if we could find some more
Oh, that'd be cool, yeah.
script and whatnot. So how would our audience get a hold of you, Dennis?
So we have a website, stonehengeusa.com, and when they go to that, they can actually find an email address. We have our, we have a phone number on there. They can actually download a free app on their
great.
phone,
Yeah.
and they can actually do a virtual tour at home. It has pictures, text, and it talks to them.
Nice. Yep.
And a 12-minute video in the theater, they can see that too before they show up. And if they pre-purchase tickets online, they save a little bit of money, and the ticket's good forever. And our Facebook, Instagram, and we
Good,
have special
good.
events like the Equinox we just had. We'll put those activities up there. We have a drum and circle coming up this summer,
Oh, wonderful.
and things like that we'll announce.
Yes,
you know,
I
so.
have some friends that would like to attend that
Oh,
too.
definitely, yeah. It's a lot of
Yes.
fun. I've done it, yeah.
So, in answer to our burning question, is America's Stonehenge haunted? What are your feelings then?
I think there's something to it. I mean, we've been investigating that since the 60s, even
Yeah.
before Hans came along. And the people that have been doing this kind of research feel that's true, and it's a layering of cultures. So we're looking at not just one time period, but
right.
many, many different time periods, perhaps, you know. And I think there's a lot of activity here.
And when you get the different various groups, divergent groups that don't really know each other, and they come up with some of the same information.
It's
that's
interesting.
You have to
Yeah.
sit up and take a look at that.
Yeah, it kind of gives me the chills when somebody separately does it, and it could be years between the,
I know.
and,
Yep.
and a similar type of thing. So yeah, it is quite interesting for sure. Yeah.
So, the consensus from our investigators, just about everybody felt that this place was very peaceful, and that from time to time there's a lot of activity that goes on behind the scenes, but it isn't all the time. But what I would suggest is that everybody hop in their car and drive up here and meet the Stone family and come and check out the place for yourself and see if there are any ghosts. So this concludes another episode of Edge of Reality TV. So we'll see you all next time, and thank you for watching. And thank you, Dennis.
And thank you so much for coming down.
Always
We
a
appreciate it.